Um, After Season of Defiance, we'll head into Season of the Deep. How long are seasons?
3 months.
Okay. With some time under our belt to react to recent player feedback, Season of the Deep will not feature a vendor upgrade paradigm. The same will be true for the following season. This doesn't mean players will never see a vendor upgrade system again, but instead means we want to create more varied experimental frameworks that slowly create a wide variety of different systems for players to show their investment into seasonal content. This variety will also extend into the types of content players experience in the moment-to-moment gameplay of our later seasons. In both Seasons of the Deep and Season 22, which I assume Season of the Deep is 21,
Mm-hmm.
the the team is pushing the envelope to create more fresh activity experiences than like when we first unveiled the Shattered Realm in Season of the Lost or debuted Battlegrounds in Season of the Chosen. Uh, One thing we want to continue from last year is casting a wide net when it comes to the themes and fantasies our players can expect with each release. Lightfall already has a very different tone and setting from the Witch Queen, and we want to continue this tonal variety in our season content. From Reapers to Pirates to Cowboys, last year's seasons proved that Destiny 2 can encompass experiences that contain wildly varied inspirations and are committed to the adventures in Lightfall's collection of seasons, feeling just as thematically fresh from one another as they did last year. These stories, progressions, and themes aren't the only way we think we can stretch the player imagination space. Some of this is going to come from putting new systems into Destiny 2 or revisiting systems that aren't quite hitting the mark. In Lightfall, we'll be adding Guardian ranks to the game alongside rethinking Destiny 2 build crafting with loadouts. While we aren't going to go deep into either of those systems here, they both represent new lenses that we want to continue to apply to Destiny 2. For example, Guardian ranks aim to be the effortless way Guardians share their place in their journey with one another. No longer will the number next to your nameplate be a representative of how much you've grinded the season pass. Instead, it's a representation of your experience as a Guardian and the challenges you faced and overcome.
So, in regards to that, that's actually something I'm most excited about, especially as it relates to the experiences as a guardian, as opposed to that seasonal level of investment. That kind of in a way is stepping back into this level mindset. Like, how much time have you actually put into that? And the fact that that number has been resetting over and over and over again, I think is and will hopefully end up being kind of a real positive thing for that investment. Meaning, back to my original like frustration of, well, there's not really much that I can invest in now because that's just going to change. And the same thing vice versa for you. And hopefully that is how they end up kind of solving and bridging that gap. That it's like, oh, you're still investing in your guardian rank and your, into that, and what you're doing is still moving that needle forward. And that's what I'm hopeful and looking forward to, in that respect.
Okay. You're going to want a killer set of weapons for those challenges. And this year, we're going to change how you think about obtaining those weapons with some major updates to weapon crafting. While we love having some sources of deterministic perks, we've found that the route to getting weapons you want to craft can be too random. At the same time, we also believe that weapon crafting being a part of so many of our weapon chases has diminished the joy of simply getting a great perk roll as a drop. So here's what you can expect to change with weapon crafting in the year of Lightfall. Because they do their expansions annually, right?
Yes, once a year.
Okay. To create independent chases for both crafted and non-crafted weapons, starting with Lightfall, fewer of our total weapons will be craftable, and more of our weapons with long-term sources will get value from random perk rolls. To allow these non-crafted weapons to stand toe-to-toe with crafted weapons in Lightfall, in the year of Lightfall, more and more of our non-crafted weapons, starting with the new raid add-ups this year, will have the ability to be enhanced.
Yeah.
Enhancing allows your drop weapon to start leveling up, use mementos, and gain access to both enhanced perks and enhanced intrinsic properties, but only the enhanced versions of the perks and masterwork that are already on the version of the weapon you are enhancing. Simply said, with some time and resources, enhancing allows you to take the random rolled weapon you've obtained and enhance its existing roll to match the full power of a crafted weapon. We are targeting to roll this out initially with Lightfall Raid adepts at the launch of Season of the Deep. Long term, we want to expand this functionality to most of our non-crafted weapon drops, but there are still some technical hurdles that we need to solve first. For crafted weapons, we will have some additional changes planned. You will never see deep sight on a weapon unless it is something you need to make the pattern progress on. You will see a red border in-game. You'll know it's valuable. Targeting Season of the Deep, we will also be adding a mechanism to activate deep sight on any craftable weapon they do not have the pattern for.
I think that's
so
awesome.
How does it work now, and how do you see that changing the day-to-day collection feeling?
I think for me, and I will have to let like Nanny or Chris kind of weigh in more on the crafting system, because I just have not really engaged with it. I've done it a little bit, but I more or less enjoyed the fact that they added leveling essentially back to the weapons themselves, and you can kind of see as you use the weapon, it continues to have and level up, which in this case opens up like new patterns and perks and things like that. But that's one of the things that was really just for me and Witch Queen, I really did not engage with the crafting system itself, but what they're laying out here does sound fascinating. That enhancing that time that you spend with the weapon, being able to invest in that weapon, I think is going to be something that personally resonates well with me, because that's usually the kind of content, that horizontal kind of progression that I end up leaning into. Is like, yeah, you got that weapon. Okay, now you can continue to invest in that weapon itself to make it even better. And then that's just going to be where I fall into that. So if I have Nanny or Chris want to kind of weigh in with any more details on how it currently functions, like they would have to be the experts in this case.
So when you get a weapon roll, when it drops, does that not just end up like Diablo, where like you get a really good weapon to drop, and then because it's the wrong stats, you don't care, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, it's when it comes to perks, like you're chasing that kind of god roll. And Nanny says that the changes are actually great because the current system means that players sometimes have to get 10 to 15 rolls of a weapon just to unlock the build, and then leveling it up all the way for those enhanced perks.
Okay.
So that now that random weapons can have enhanced perks like crafted weapons, which means that you don't have to farm out so many rolls if you happen to get the one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then how often do you think you find weapons when you're out grinding? Like crafting.
You get weapons all the time, okay. But yeah, like it's doing the content, playing, etc. And then you might, not get exactly what you're wanting or what you're looking for.
I mean, what feels good to me is shooting things and then that candy drops, right? That nice shiny, it's something shiny. It's the same in Diablo.
Yeah. Ooh, candy.
Big
they're
stuff,
also changing
big
blues,
explosion
so
of enemies, and then a bunch of loot showers the ground. Like that's what makes those really satisfying.
Yeah.
Action RPG style games where you're just like, you're in it, you're in the action, all this stuff's dying, and then loot drops. I think it's why chest runs in New World feel good, because that combat system really leans into that action RPG, and that's the only time that you feel like there's crazy amounts of like action combat and crazy amounts of loot, and it just feels like this crazy big loot pinata moment. Diablo feels like that all the time, even when you're by yourself, because you're pulling hordes of enemies. And when you look at something like Destiny, like it feels like that sometimes, especially because like the shooting feels so good. You're like, oh my god, they just keep coming. There's always something to shoot. It's constant trigger pulling. So that's good.
Yes.
All right. Finally, we want to tackle one more thing out of game with our goal of expanding the player imagination. That's giving our players a little more of a sneak peek into releases before they hit servers. So while some of our releases this year will be kept secret until they hit players' machines, others, like Season of the Deep, will preview and share key details ahead of time. We could have all the variety in the world, and that wouldn't matter much if we weren't also making sure the content that our players spend the most time with is engaging and interesting. There's a lot that goes into making a piece of Destiny content engaging, but at the Chewy Center, it's challenge. Last year, we spent a lot of time bringing all of our subclasses up to the Stasis 3.0 standard. During that time, not only did our abilities become more powerful, but their synergies with weapons and gear raised the total power tide for all boats. The result of these changes is a game with more compelling RPG, but at times, lower levels of challenge in our core content. With a player base as large as Destiny's, the right level of difficulty is going to be different for everyone. While we are still committed to offering multiple difficulties in level in content such as our campaigns, nightfalls, secret missions, dungeons, and raids, we feel like the baseline challenge in most of our content is just too low. Do you agree with that?
Yes. And again, like the raids, and they have, especially with the latest season, the Seraph, the seasonal, activity. I thought the challenge was actually really good on that. And they really, I think you can kind of see that what they're talking about here already, kind of easing its way into the latest challenge. I think even the community kind of even echoed that. They're like, yeah, it's hitting us back, but you go out into the open world and like there's, like it's not that scary. It's not challenging. And you have so much, I've even run some old strikes and it's like, you just kind of just like, yep, melt everything down. And so I'm wondering if right now they're going to talk about tuning abilities, but I'm wondering if they're going to get into like talking about the current content offerings that they have and maybe some adjustments there as well.
So in Final Fantasy, to make content more challenging, it typically means more mechanically demanding because most of the rotations are relatively straightforward and you're either doing it right or you're not, regardless of the content. And because there's not a direct feedback mechanism telling you when you do your rotation wrong, a lot of players that aren't doing it well don't know they're not doing it well. And so ultimately it's getting hit by things. And because of the way the game communicates mechanics, a lot of that is understanding the dance. And so the complexity of the dance, especially with the release of Omega Ultimate, the complexity of the dance is how we mark difficulty. Within shooters, though, that's a little bit harder because typically when you just dial up the amount of life or damage that something does, it can start to make something feel like a bullet sponge. I think the Division is something that really comes to mind where like sometimes I felt like, so we're just going to shoot this guy with 6,000 bullets and he's just going to be fine. And like he's just walking around and it's like, and like I know there's people that really enjoyed the Division. I think there was a lot of great underpinnings, but when I fought a boss, sometimes it just didn't feel good.
Yeah.
So how are they going to increase the base difficulty without just making it a bullet sponge?
Well, they've done mechanics and they've added, and that's been continual throughout it. So I think you're right. There is a mechanical side of it. I think also it's gonna probably maybe like have things hit harder and either need to take up more damage, but I don't think that's going to be their only lean in. Like they're talking about tuning abilities here, so let's go ahead and dive into that. It says to bring back challenge to Destiny requires a two-pronged approach. If we just tuned up our enemies across the game, we would just start to encounter issues where combatants frequently one-shot players and would feel super spongy. As a result, even more relaxing content would require players to confirm to the most meta Guardian loadouts. Now, on the other hand, if we were only to tune the players efficiently, the RPG elements would start to feel like they matter less, and Destiny might start to lose its essential fantasy to bring this powerful battle wizard in space. So instead of focusing just on one vendor, we're going to take measured approaches to both the player toolkit and the strength of our monsters. Now let's start with the toolkit. Across both PvE and PvP, we believe that abilities dominate too many engagements due to the potency, which we don't want to nerf, and uptime, which we do want to tackle. Destiny is a game about guns and powers, and we want both to shine. So starting in Lightfall, we are moderately increasing ability recharge times across a wide selection of our abilities, as mentioned in the ability tuning preview last week. Now, we've also noticed the enemy commands that aren't hitting as hard as we want them to, specifically against max resilience guardians. So we're adjusting the amount of damage resistance granted by resilience and increasing the energy cost of resilience mods from 1 to 2 and minor mods from 3 to 4. And to give you some context, I think I was playing with Nanny and we were all having a good time. And they're like, oh yeah, the meta is resilience. And I was like, because before I was like recovery and speed and I was having fun, but then I started playing with them in like this last year and was getting just melted. Tuned that resistance up to 10 and it was like, you can't kill me. It's just like, it is ridiculously how powerful that was. So this seems fair, and also the fact that the mods, like that whole system is being updated, and I think in very positive ways, but increasing that ability to get that resilience up will end up being a huge benefit in that regards, so that there's a bigger cost to it. So you're sacrificing something if you do want that resilience, and it's not like that resilience means it's going to be an instant win for you. But it goes on and says, with the build crafting updates, we believe great builds will be much more accessible to the community. And while we still want your gear and your mods to be critical, some of the buffs to Guardian's damage and survivability were just too strong in the old system. So we've taken this opportunity to balance patch the gear-driven buffs. Now, I know that the last paragraphs might be scary to read, but we don't think that these changes are going to be as big swing of a balanced pendulum. More than anything, it's about renting out some unintentional power creep, and we saw over the last year. We're committed as always to making your Guardian feel like the ultimate monster killing machine, and I'm confident with Strand, our new buildcraft updates, and a suite of new weapons coming to Lightfall that you'll be making Zavala and Shax very proud. Now, on the enemy side of adjustments, so that's the Guardian side. For the enemies, but I promised a two-sided approach to the challenge, so let's talk about how things will be shaking up with enemy difficulty. Recently, we've been happy with the level of challenge present in the base heist battlegrounds. Yes, that is absolutely, I echo that. That's very good right there. To achieve this, we used a difficulty knob that enforces just how over-leveled we will let players be compared to the enemies they are fighting. This knob has always been present across our activities, and it's adjusted based on how evergreen we want the challenge and those missions. We were pretty aggressive with this adjustment in the Season of the Seraph, and it produced great results. So these base battleground playlists in Season of Defiance will use the same settings, carrying this approach over. And we're also going to be adjusting this same difficulty tweak to the Vanguard Ops playlist as well. That's great. We aren't going to set this playlist knob to a level quite as intense as the Battleground playlist, but we want to use this as a setting to make Vanguard Ops a more engaging and for the average Guardian starting Lightfall. This approach to power difficulty is also going to be present when players are roaming around Namora, and while we don't want the entire game to feel like it's tuned up to 11, we think these challenges will help enemy forces patrolling Namora feel dangerous and worth your attention. Now, they continue, you may have noticed that we have been experimenting a lot with our power settings over the last few seasons, and we're planning on taking even more experiments this year. We think that there are some major issues with power in Destiny 2 and how it prevents players from seeing some of our best content. So we'd like to make a big change in the system in the final shape. However, to understand more about how this changes can be improved, we want to keep tweaking power settings over the year of Lightfall. Some of these tweaks will be found in our back end with a little transparency in the average Guardian, while others will be front and center. For example, when Lightfall launches, we will have the power climb that is very similar to that of the Witch Queen, but later in Season of the Deep, we don't plan to raise the power or pinnacle cap at all. And I think, and I one of the things that has been talked about a lot within the community is that just give us the power cap, right? For the year. Don't sit here and make it always like ever increasing. Just make it for the year and then have more ways that players can either reach that or invest in it. Like, or even the get to the cap, it gets harder and harder, but then as the year goes, it gets easier and easier, etc. Rather than continuing to kind of push that out a little bit further each and every time. But that's how I read that. That's how I read and understand that. It sounds like Deep is going to be the power cap for the Lightfall, and then that won't increase until the next year.